Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, going well, Aaron. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Well, Christmas is nearly upon us, and it'd be fair to say, Tim, we got a Christmas present for the SMSF industry this week, and that is the finalisation of the regulations around legacy pension conversions. And recently, we spoke about through a couple of Feeling Smarter episodes uh, how these measures are intended on working. So we're not really going to go through that in great detail, but I might get you to give a quick overview and most importantly, some of the changes that have occurred since consultation with Treasury and you being involved in that process, and ultimately what this now means for people that have these complying lifetime pensions and market-linked pensions and other defined benefit income streams within their SMSFs.
Yeah, so look, it's interesting because I mean the final regulations are not too far removed from the original draft consultation regulations, and that's a positive. There's some negative elements to that in that we pushed hard to get some resolution where, say, a former legacy pension holder has passed away and there's reserves sitting in the fund there. We looked to try and get some clear avenues to be able to work through that, but that wasn't forthcoming. However, there is still workarounds that people can contemplate with the element that talks exclusively about reserve allocation. So there's one downside there. I think probably on the positive side, the final release or the final regulations that were registered by the government have clarified a couple of issues that were felt to be accounted for in the consultation, but weren't necessarily clear. And so I think there's some certainty around things such as flexi pensions and how they will operate in this space, but also the allocation. If someone makes an allocation before the regulations come in, those allocations may count towards a concessional cap versus any allocations being made after the timing of the regulations counting towards a non-concessional cap. So there's some quirky things there, but ultimately where we've landed is we now have the ability, first and foremost from a CISAC point of view, to commute complying lifetime pensions, complying life expectancy pensions, and market-linked pensions. And beyond that, we have the ability to make allocations from a reserve within a self-managed super fund, either fully exempted from the caps or to be measured against the non-concessional cap.
Yeah, and quirky is probably the right word because it is an area that we don't see a significant number of these still floating around, but it'll be quite fascinating through this period now to see just how many of these are out in the marketplace as people become aware of that additional commutation opportunity. Because, as you rightly said, the restriction was in place around these pensions because of the old pension RBL, and we show our age when we talk in that context. But the reality is there was no ability to exit these types of pensions, whereas we now have a very clear and clean route to be able to do that, either into another superannuation income stream, like an account-based pension, to leave it within accumulation, or simply to exit the system. And this is where advice is going to play a significant role here, because it's not only alignment to transfer balance caps and stuff, but we also then going to have to think about asset test exemption, broader estate planning issues and the like too.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't want to sort of dwell on the fact that there's two issues to contemplate, and one is the commutability of these pensions, and so that in itself is a pure advice piece. Like, is it the right step to stop the existing pension? And look, fundamentally, we are talking about lifetime and market link because the vast majority, let's call it 98, 99% of fixed term pensions have already reached the end of their term. So we're talking lifetime and market link might primarily. So the question becomes, do we stop these? And as you rightly point out, it's going to be about asset test exemption in most circumstances. But then the other piece is, okay, well, if we have set up reserves inside our fund for other purposes, and there's been a multitude of purposes over the SMSF journey as to why somebody has had a reserve, is this now an opportunity to say, right, well, we can look to clean that reserve up by utilising the non-concessional contribution caps, but also where somebody isn't entitled to the non-concessional cap because they've got more than $1.9 million under the current general transfer balance cap, then look at it and say, okay, well, if we make the allocation, then we exceed the non-concessional cap, which then gives us access to that money via a release authority, where the only tax impost is going to be the taxing of the associated earnings, inclusive of the 15% offset.
Yeah, so in that instance, it becomes somewhat negligible in the broader scheme of things when someone might simply want to not only exit the pension, but potentially exit the SMSF as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Bring that money out.
Yeah, so the other thing, I guess, as we now look forward, because we have certainty now through these regulations, and I guess I say certainty because there is a process that we need to go through around how these regulations get registered. So I guess, Tim, the positive there is that we may or may not see Parliament return. So that could be seen as a positive, I guess, in respect to a number of key areas. But one of the things that we need to now start to think about is how we can actually unwind these arrangements. So what are some of the things that come to mind for you when we have to start to talk to our clients and go, well, actually, I do want to execute on the commutation of a market-linked pension, of a defined benefit income stream that they may have. So what are some of the things that come to mind that practitioners need to be understanding to put in place this new piece of legislation or regulations?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a number of issues, and I'm probably going to, in this conversation piece, sort of sidestep things like the trust deed, because one of the I guess the controversial elements of these pensions was your deed must provide for them, and this was a requirement that dates all the way back to 2005, where if you were to maintain this style of pension, then your deed had to provide for them. So by suggesting that it had to provide for them, no doubt they probably provide that they can't be commuted, and so whether or not there is some concept or some issue there that we need to be able to work through. But then, in addition to that, there is still the SIS commutation requirements. So there is still the conditions under lifetime pensions for how you calculate the commutable value. Now, in the scheme of things, there's already the avenue, and this has been shown when people have commuted from a compliant lifetime to a market linked, that you can then also transfer the associated reserves with that commutation. So there's no real issue associated with that, but you've still got to identify what the commutable value is and separate for the calculation purposes commutable value versus reserve allocation, and then make that allocation to the member. And if, for example, you've got multiple members in the fund, then one of the areas that the regulations are quite specific on is ensuring that any allocation is fair and reasonable based on the income stream that the individuals had previously. So probably if one good thing's come out of the way that a lot of the accounting softwares have dealt with this is that they've retained them as separate member interests, even though they're classified as reserve. So that will make the allocation quite simple in most instances for a lot of people. So that's one thing to be mindful of. But then the other one is for those such as the fixed term pensions, which have largely ceased. It's identifying that reserve is a reserve that was supporting a pension, right? And making sure that then your documentation is probably more specific to fixed term pensions, that you're talking about reserve allocations rather than the language that you might use for a lifetime or a market linked pension.
Yeah, so I think if the ones that stand out for me there are certainly the deed. So that in itself will be quite interesting, because what you'll find over time is that those rules that stipulated the requirements around defined benefits and market linked pensions, they in essence were being carried through in deed updates and preserving those measures when, as you said, they were quite clear that you couldn't actually do a commutation. So we're doing a bit of work around that. I think the other area is being quite clear and looking at the nature and looking at how your deed deals with reserves. So again, looking at those requirements. And then the other area that sticks out to me is how the construct of those pensions and the documents have been formulated, and therefore allowing you to put in place changes to the rules under which the pensions are operating as well, that would then allow for that commutation to occur. So I know, Tim, you and I do a bit of work around market link pensions and conversions of defined benefits over the past few years, in particular with the changes that we saw, I think it was April 22, with excess transfer balance amounts and those amounts that move from cap defined benefit into ordinary pensions. So we actually see a number of areas that we need to put in play, and the steps that need to be put in place to ensure that we ultimately comply with what these measures allow us to do. And I think it'd be fair to say, Tim, given the amount of knowledge that we have in here and the fact that we've got some of these documents already available, this will be certainly an area that will be able to assist not only our members, but those who have any of the pensions that would or are allowed to be commuted under these new regulations.
Yeah, that's right. And probably the last thing I would say on that is because I mentioned them earlier, is having a recognition that that flexi pensions, so those pensions referred to previously as like 106.6 pensions, they don't fit under these new commutation rules because they already have existing commutation requirements, and those commutation requirements are very distinct from anything else, and indeed they don't provide for any sort of substantial commutation value to be attached to it. So if one of these pensions is ceased, there will be the commutation element, which needs to be calculated, and then you'll have a much larger reserve, which will fit under the new reserve regulations. But because it's a defined pension in nature, it will be able to be allocated to the member without any cap consequences. But I do want to reiterate, of course, we're talking about members that are still alive in most of these instances. There are other things to consider where members have passed away, but certainly from a membership, if the member is still alive, whether the pension has ceased or not yet, then those reserves will be considered pension reserves and will be able to be allocated back to that member.
Absolutely. Well, I think it was fair to say we both got a very pleasant surprise when we saw the announcement of these regulations. We very quickly jumped on to have a look and see what had and hadn't changed. And once again, obviously, this is an area that we do have a lot of expertise, given the grey hair that we both have a little bit there, reflecting our time in the industry and our understanding of how these certainly operate. So if you do have any questions around these measures and potentially the steps that you need to put in place, please feel free to get in contact with us at Smarter SMSF, and we're more than happy to help. Thanks again for your time, Tim.
No worries, Aaron.
Excellent. All right. Have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to you joining us for next week's edition of Feeling Smarter. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.